Hi, I'm Kaden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, they say when it rains, it pours. And if you want to talk about conflict and mistakes, it has been absolutely pouring on us in terms of trying to get this episode recorded. So first and foremost, we are actually recording this on Tuesday the 13th. We had recorded this last night, but we didn't record it because somebody, me, forgot to hit the record button. So we knocked out about a 40 minute episode just for me to walk over and see the blank screen on my phone. So that has led to us being here.
Yep.
But
it's a lost episode.
The lost episode. Then to get to the pouring part of this rain, I looked at my schedule for next week and it's just not going to work for me to record neither Monday or Tuesday night before the episode would go up Wednesday morning. So in a little bit of a twist of fate and a turn of events, we are not only doing the AFC and NFC South this video, but we are doing the whole rest of the NFL. We are doing the NFC and AFC South as well as the NFC and AFC West. Mm-hmm. So no episode next week, but this episode is going to be twice as long. So you get that bittersweet there. You get a little bit of the best of both worlds. And to kind of make up on some time, since it is going to be a longer episode, we are just going to go ahead and get things rolling. You already know how it works at this point, with this being usually episode 3 of 4, but now, surprise, episode 3 of 3. We are going to do the AFC first, then move on to the NFC, and we will do 4, 3, 2, 1 for each spot. So let's just get it rolling right now, starting with the AFC South and the 4th place team, which is none other than Anthony Richardson and the Indianapolis Colts. Now, we'll probably do a lot of repeating ourselves this episode, at least for us, since we already did it. So apologies for that. But what we said last time is we both really like the Indianapolis Colts in this one. I think Anthony Richardson is a great running quarterback, but he's going to be my X factor for the Colts this year because a lot of their team, especially their defense, I really do like. But it's all going to come down is to, can Anthony Richardson be a quarterback? Not a dual threat quarterback, but a true quarterback. And when he gets put in the positions where they're down in a game or he has to make big passing plays on 3rd and long, can he do it? I personally don't overly think he will, which is a big front-running reason why I have them 4th in this division. But the main reason I have them 4th in this division is I think they are still going to be a good team and win a good number of games. But this AFC South is just a stacked division, which is pretty crazy because not too many years ago, probably just 2-3 years ago, it was one of the worser divisions team for team in the NFL,
league. Definitely.
And now it's probably a top 2, top 3 division in the NFL right now. So what a change of pace in just a couple of years for all of these really young teams. So I do like the Colts. I think they're up and coming. But for right now, I still have them 4th in the AFC South.
Yeah, and this was a tough division to pick. And I think the Colts just end up in 4th by just circumstance because the rest of the division is so top-heavy. But I expect the Colts to at least be early on, be in that wild card race. I expect them to win a good amount of games. And the big X factor for them is Jonathan Taylor and that running game. And if they can get Jonathan Taylor running again like he did a couple years ago, then they can be right back to even 3rd or even 2nd in this division. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them as a wild card team.
Yeah, I think that this division is a kind of a dark horse or an underrunner for being the first division to ever have all 4 teams make the playoffs with the new 7-team playoff format. So we'll have to see, but I mean, it could happen. Big reason it could happen is because the fact that this team is only the 3rd place team with the Tennessee Titans coming in at that 3rd place location. Now, I absolutely love the Tennessee Titans this year. Brian Callahan is one of my top coaches in the league, and he's getting his first shot at being a head coach right here. They brought in so many players and really built around their quarterback this offseason, which you love to see a team do. But the big thing with the Titans here for me is that said quarterback. I think that Will Levis has all the weapons in the world around him right now and all the opportunity to come out and have a stellar sophomore season. But that big question mark, of course, comes in just like Anthony Richardson. Even though he's in a good position, can he come out and perform like he should? Can he come out and be the quarterback he needs to be for the Titans to go far in this year? I think that it's a better chance than Richardson. I really do, just because he's got an even better situation and better weapons around him and a better, more passing oriented head coach. But nonetheless, I still think that it's a relatively low chance. The Titans, I love all the changes they made, but they just made way too many changes way too fast. If you look at the Titans from a year or two ago compared to what the Titans are going to be this year, it's not just a whole new coaching scheme. It's like a whole new culture there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going from this run, round, or ground and pound 40 times, run it 40 times a game and defense oriented team to an air raid offense that focuses on pass rush and putting up points more than defense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a lot of change really fast. And teams in the league have proved that it can happen. One team that we might be talking about at the top of this division, but I just don't think it happens again.
Yeah, I really like the Titans in this one. I expected them to, I actually predicted them to maybe even win this division. I had to be talked down and compromised down to third, just because of the other teams in this division are so top heavy. It's a really fun division. And I expect the Titans to do really well with that receiving core, led by DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Nick Westbrook-Akine, Treylon Burks, and can't forget about Tyler Boyd, the late addition. And he comes over with Brian Callahan, who came over with this from the Cincinnati Bengals. And I expect them to have a very similar style offense to the Cincinnati Bengals with that air raid style, throw it downfield, 30 to 40 times a game. Instead of running it 40 times a game, they're going to throw it 30 to 40 times a game. And that's just the way that this team has changed into a new culture, like you said, and the way they transformed with the new coaching staff coming in from Cincinnati. I expect them to not only be one of the more dangerous teams in the NFL, but one of the top offenses at the end of the year this year.
Yeah, this is far and away one of the most intriguing teams to watch this year, just because all that change. And I mean, personally, for me, because of Brian Callahan. God, I love Brian Callahan. So moving on to number 2 in this division, as I say every week, of course, once you see number 2, you know who's going to be number 1. But don't get too far ahead of ourselves. We'll get there, because at number 2, we have Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, this is another team, just like these other 2 teams are trying to do, that were able to really turn themselves around really fast. And last year, they came out hot, and they looked like they were not only going to win this division, but they looked like they were going to dominate this division and borderline make a deep playoff run or Super Bowl run. But it seems like through the year, they just kind of trickled down. And it seemed like they started dropping games they shouldn't have and just playing worse than they did at the beginning of the season. I think a lot of that has to do with, first of all, a first-year head coach in Doug Peterson, even though he's very experienced, still a new head coach on the team. And a big factor in that is just the fact that they were such a young team and weren't really ready for that success and winning, because other than in college with, of course, like Trevor Lawrence, they didn't really have that success in winning in the NFL yet. So now that they kind of got a little more of a taste of that and got some more experience under their belt, I think that they continue to play better this season, and I think that they could easily be one of the better teams in the entirety of the AFC. But ironically saying that, I don't even think they win this division because of a team that we'll talk about in a second year, who I think will do even better. But nonetheless, I see a much better and more consistent start to finish season for the Jaguars.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a more consistent season for the Jags, because Trevor Lawrence is coming into his prime. And I expect Lawrence to have a really big year. And he just signed his big offseason contract in this offseason. What was it, a 4-year? He was
one of the big ones.
One of the big ones. He was the highest paid for like 2 weeks until one of the other deals. So was half
the NFL.
Yeah. So, but he became one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. And like I said last week, that contract says you better win a lot of games. And I expect Lawrence to win a lot of games and the Jags to win a lot of games in the AFC South this year. especially in the AFC South, where they have really dominated their division for the past couple of years. But with that late stretch last year and then early on this past year, when they came back, when who was it? The Titans lost the division a couple of years ago. Remember that it came down to the last game of the season.
Oh yeah,
and the Jaguars won it. So
they
the
almost
Jaguars
did exactly what the Jaguars did last year.
Yeah, they did that opposite
yeah.
of the year before. So I expect the Jags to be much more consistent this year. Like I said, even though they did lose Calvin Ridley, they bring in Gabriel Davis, and they still have Christian Kirk, who has really lived up to that contract, who signed it a couple years ago and was really criticized much by many analysts.
Oh yeah, we all made fun of them for that. I mean, it was so much money for a guy who was kind of unproven as a outside receiver, but then they just made him be a slot receiver, and he absolutely thrived, and he kind of became worth that money. They also pick up Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round of the draft this year.
They expect to be their number one later on.
Straight out of LSU, receiver university. I mean, it's a good bet to take a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. So now moving on to number one, who you already know who it is, the young guns in the league in the Houston Texans. Now, there's a huge chance for a sophomore slump by this team in general, not even any specific players, because a good portion of the starters and stars on this team are rookies. So, I mean, if they get a little bit of an epidemic of a sophomore slump going, they go from a top of the AFC team to a bottom of the AFC team again. So they better be careful of that. But I mean, they were one of the biggest turnarounds I can think of in this short time span in a long time. I mean, when you have two top three picks like they did in CJ Stroud Jr. and Will Anderson Jr., you expect to very early on see a lot of success. But first year, seeing as much success as they did and hitting on CJ Stroud like they did is so cool. And this team is just absolutely stacked that I think even if they go into this year with making very little additions and very little changes, they'd still be a pretty damn good team and be fighting for that AFC South. But they even go crazier during the offseason, and to go along with all the rookies they have, get a huge veteran presence wide receiver in Stephon Diggs on their offense, and a huge veteran presence edge rusher with Danielle Hunter on their defense. So two huge additions to add on to an already stacked team. I just don't see how they lose this division. There's, of course, some question marks. There's, of course, some possibilities. Nothing is impossible. But overall, I don't know how they lose this division. Not because it's an easy win division, but just because they are so good top to bottom.
Yeah, they are definitely one of the more well-rounded teams in the NFL, and definitely in the AFC South, where this is going to be a fun division to watch in this 1-2 battle between the Jags and the Texans, with the Titans, kind of throwing their hat into the ring and seeing if they can get a wild card spot. But as far as the Texans go, I expect them to have one of the best years of their NFL franchise career. As far as the Texans go, where I look for them to be much better at is the running game, with Joe Mixon coming in that running back room. And I expect them to team well with Dameon Pierce, their starter last year. And they'll be the nice 1-2 combo for the Texans in the running back room. And I think that's going to be a big X factor, is how well the running game performs, because they got the connection in the passing game with Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell. And you can't forget about Robert Woods, who's still there. A nice veteran presence in the receiver room also, and very consistent and reliable. And that's big in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, even like their backups, like their fourth or fifth wide receiver is John Mechie, and their backup tight end is Brevin Jordan. That's behind Dalton Schultz, who absolutely killed it last year.
Definitely.
This team's just stacked, and it's not even like, but their offensive line sucks. No, they have Kenyon Green and one of the better up-and-coming guards in the league, and Laramie Tunsil, who's been one of the best left tackles since he got drafted, since draft day pretty much. So just absolutely stacked from top to bottom. Insane.
They're going to be a fun team to watch this year.
100%. So now moving on to the NFC South, which is probably one of the more open or up for grab divisions in the entire league for the opposite reason of the AFC South. They are not quite as good when you look at all 4 teams. But that makes it just as fun to watch because you have no idea who's going to come out and perform well. You have no idea who's going to make a run at winning this division. One team that we think doesn't really have much of a run at making this division is our 4th place team with the Carolina Panthers. Now, when you take a guy first overall as a quarterback like they did Bryce Young, you expect him to show up within the first couple of years. So if history can repeat itself like it has for some other high drafted quarterbacks, Bryce Young could come out and have a really good year, and that could easily push them up the rankings of being one of the better teams in the NFC South and giving them a chance at winning that division. But you usually see them get better when a team starts to build around them. They get them more protection, they get them more weapons. Sometimes even they just improve the defense, so there's not so much on that quarterback. And the problem here with Carolina is the Panthers did not do that at all. The only addition they made weapon-wise is in the draft with their second round pick, I believe 33rd overall, Xavier Leggett, who does look like he could easily be a very good wide receiver in the league. But one man isn't going to change that whole roster. No. They needed a lot more than one man, and it was all they got. They have the cap room. They don't really have the draft capital and trade capital. So that's kind of where the problems came in. I'm not saying that they could have done more. I'm just saying they need to do more, or else they're going to be in a very similar situation to they were last year. And they didn't. So, of course, I have them right here in the same situation they were last year.
Yeah, I don't expect the Panthers to win many games again this year. They just didn't do much to improve their team. And the new coach they selected was criticized as not being experienced enough to be a head coach. So we'll see how well that really works out. But the minimal weapons that they do have was Adam Thielen, Xavier Leggett, and their draft pick, Jonathan Brooks from Texas, who is coming off an ACL tear, but was one of the top running backs before that ACL tear. So it will be interesting to see how he performs coming off that injury. But one big X factor for them, and I do expect to perform well, is actually their newest pickup, Deontay Johnson, who they got from the Steelers.
Forgot about Deontay Johnson. That is an underrated pickup. I
yes,
forgot about him.
They do. So they do have a wide receiver there who they did have Adam Thielen, but he's not really that number one guy. Whereas Deontay Johnson, even though I haven't been very high on him, can be a very nice number one guy for this young team. And I expect the Panthers to maybe win more games than they did last year, but that still isn't going to be very many.
I forgot about Deontay Johnson. I do really like that pickup for them. I think that'll help them out, but still just not quite enough at the end of the day. And for a split second, I almost said one of their brighter spots on defense was Brian Burns. But they don't even have Brian Burns anymore. He went to the New York Giants this offseason.
They traded him.
It's really all downhill for the Panthers, except for a few additions. So moving on to our number 3 spot, we have the New Orleans Saints. Now this top 3 right here in the AFC South is really where it got hard to pick, because you pull a name out of a hat out of these 3 teams, and they all have a pretty damn even chance of winning this AFC South this year. But for now, we have the Saints a little lower. Callan wanted them a little higher. I was able to push them down a little bit and get them down here to 3. One thing I will give to the Saints is I feel like the Saints are always a team that overperform from their roster. I feel like for the last couple of years, I've looked at their roster and been like, this is not going to be a good team. And they still find ways to go out and win games and get those dubs that they need to kind of keep themselves in the AFC or the NFC South race or the wild card race or whatever you want to look at. But they just seem to be a team that always does better than they should. So I preface that because I don't think they'll do good. I say it almost every year. I still don't think that they'll do good this year. I just think Derek Carr isn't going to take this team any further than he has already, which isn't overly far, even though they do a little better than I think they will. And I think Alvin Kamara is just another year older, which with any more in the league, running backs are just a dime a dozen, so that hurts a lot more. I do think Chris Olave is set to have a really good season as he's kind of entering his prime of what receivers are nowadays. And this defense will, of course, always be able to play as a unit and be stellar. By the end of the day, they're just, I can't do it. I can't put them any higher than 3.
I expect the Saints to actually be a surprise team this year in the NFL. I could see them winning a good number of games and even be higher in this NFC South, and especially compete for a wild card. I think Derek Carr will have another year in this New Orleans Saints system, and I think he'll be more comfortable. And I think he'll have a much better season than he had last year. I'm not saying it's going to be superstar numbers. I'm just saying he's going to have a better year than last year because he had a terrible year last year. And it's really helps that with the two-headed running back of Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams, who finally will be healthy and be able to play together all season, at least for now. They're both are healthy going into preseason, but we'll see how long that lasts, because if they are able to stick together, they are one of the most dangerous weapons in the NFL, being that duo. And I also expect Chris Olave to have a big year this year and prove that he can be one of those top Ohio State wide receivers that they seem to continue to put out.
Yeah, Ohio State versus LSU. This is a real receiver mill. You just can't tell anymore. One thing I will say that's not really an X factor or anything like that, more just a comment, but I loved the way they used Alvin Kamara last year. They lost him for the first 4 games or whatever it was, that suspension. And then like you mentioned, as soon as they got him back, Jamal Williams got hurt. So then Jamal Williams was out and they didn't really have their goal line guy. But they used Alvin Kamara in this short passing game where it was just so many dink and dunks to him and just like vertical, or rather horizontal tosses, and just getting him the ball in space with some blocking ahead of him. And it really was great for him in fantasy, especially. In PPR leagues, he went insane because he had like 11 catches a game.
That's right.
But more than anything, I think it really played to his strengths and was great for him. So maybe they do a little better if they continue to do that. But that's one thing I kind of wanted to point out because I liked it about last year. So now moving on to number 2 and the decider of the division here. At number 2, we have my personal number 1 team with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. One way I got Callan to compromise and to put the Saints at 3 was to move the Buccaneers down to 2. I think that this is the better team in this division, and I think that they will definitely find themselves in a wild card spot. But Callan did make a lot of really good points that we'll talk about in a second here to get the Falcons up to 1. But this team is just winners. Like they all are such high competitive people. Like you just really see them fight. You know, it's weird to say because of course every team fights in the NFL. No one's not competitive in the NFL. But it's just some teams you feel like are more scrappy and just almost want it more and have a little more of that fire. I feel like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are one of those teams. They have awesome veteran presence almost everywhere with guys like Chris Godwin and Mike Evans in the receiver room, and Baker Mayfield entering another year as a quarterback. And you just love to see that. And I think that the huge X factor here is, of course, going to be Baker. He had one of his better seasons of his entire career last year. He really looked like he was finally comfortable where he was and had the weapons around him, and more than anything, the coaching that he wanted around him, and just looked like he was actually enjoying the game again, kind of like he looked back at Oklahoma. So lots of things can be said about the Bucs that I really like. Rachaad White is an up-and-coming great running back. Their defense is always stellar, but Baker is who I really want to watch this year.
Yeah, and I would expect to see the Buccaneers as a wild card team or even an NFC South winner here, just because of Baker Mayfield. And he is someone who can take over games and win it by himself. And I seen him do it against the Packers last year, where he had almost a perfect completion percentage and a perfect passer rating, and in fact now holds a couple of Lambeau records as a visiting quarterback because of that game. So Baker Mayfield is very dangerous as an NFL player, and I think that he's very underappreciated and underrated, and he has really matured a lot since his days in college and early on in Cleveland. And he doesn't do the commercials as much anymore. He's really settled down, and he's really focused on football, and I think that's big for Baker. And I think because of that, the Buccaneers are going to have a really good season. I could see them winning 9-10 games and really competing for that wild card or NFC South all season long, where it'll be a 1-2 battle between these two teams, with the Saints maybe maybe surprising, but
They're a big old question mark.
they're a big question
sure.
mark. But like I said, I expect them to surprise some teams this year. But don't let Baker surprise you because he can get you anytime, anywhere.
Baker was on a Johnny Manziel path, which I mean, being drafted by the Cleveland Browns can do that to you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they really could. They got the best of him, that's for sure. But he was 100% on a Johnny Manziel path for a while there.
Those trades to Carolina and LA really aged him.
And then remember when he went into LA and was there for like, I want to say it was like 2 days before that Thursday game and went out and
had
won
to come in and win.
Oh my god!
See, that's the Raiders.
That's the stuff Baker can do. That's just that competitiveness and fire I was talking about. Stuff like that. So now moving on, as you already knew, we have the Atlanta Falcons atop the NFC South. And there is one big reason we have them atop the NFC South right here. But I'm going to kind of let Callan speak more on that. And I'm going to talk about my boy, Kirk Cousins, in his first season with the Atlanta Falcons. Now, I, of course, really like Kirk Cousins. I am so happy with what he was able to do in Minnesota. But all that being said, he is now coming in to his, oh my gosh, he was drafted in 2012, so this is his 13th
Same year as RG3.
Yeah, same year as RG3, both to the Redskins.
Yep.
But yeah, so this is his 13th season in the league, and he's coming in as a 35-year-old quarterback, fresh off of a torn ACL and a season-ending injury. So I have seen people come off of an ACL, Adrian Peterson, and literally go on an MVP caliber season.
Mm-hmm.
But Kirk Cousins isn't Adrian Peterson at the end of the day. I think he'll do fine this season. I don't think he's by any means going to go out there and do terrible. But I just don't think he's going to be quite enough to lead this team to a division win. Maybe a wild card spot just with the weapons around him. But that's kind of the reason I think that the Bucs might win it over the Falcons. But there is one man and one man only that let Callan convince me to move the Falcons to number one, and I will let him talk about them.
And that is their main X factor and big phenom, the running back of the future, Bijan Robinson. And I expect Bijan Robinson to have an MVP caliber season this year. He showed me shades of Barry Sanders in that stop and go motion, that quickness and that juke. It just reminded me of Barry. I'm not saying he's Barry. He did things that reminded me of Barry. And I was young when Barry played. So for him to remind me of that, that's very good.
So some of the jukes he makes looks like he's like missing bones or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like his body's just a little bit of jelly. Like it's insane what he can do.
It is. And because of that strong running game for the Falcons, I expect them to not only win their division, but maybe even be one of the top teams in the NFL this year with that, not only that running game of Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, but you also got the receiving weapons of Drake London and Kyle Pitts at the tight end, who I expect to have great connections with Kirk Cousins. And Cousins, who was going on an MVP-type season before his injury last year, could pick up where he left off, especially with all these weapons at his disposal down in Atlanta.
Yeah, he really thrives when he doesn't have to be the main guy. I mean, he had to be the main guy in Minnesota last year because we had no run game. And yeah, he put up MVP caliber numbers, but he wasn't putting up wins because he was doing everything because we were down all game in passing. So now that he can really lean on the rushing game and get that play action pass going, which is just where he's comfortable, this has a chance to be a really good team. And I think that their defense is a really underrated part of the Falcons too, with a guy like Grady Jarrett kind of rushing up the middle and the front seven there, and then a guy like AJ Terrell who's still killing it at corner in the secondary.
Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate because they just lost their edge rusher, Braylon Trice, their rookie edge rusher, drafted in the third round, star out of Washington from the Huskies. He played really well in college, and he was the star of that defense for the Huskies last year. But it's an unfortunate turn for him because he'll have to wait till next year to make an impact in the NFL.
It's almost like they should have taken Dallas Turner instead of Michael Penix at 8 overall.
Maybe.
Who knows? We'll have to see. But they definitely should have. We all know.
And he wouldn't end up with the Vikings.
Yeah, I'm not complaining, but they should have. So usually, of course, we would end the episode right here. But because of unforeseen and unfortunate events. We got to kind of jam-tack 2 into this episode, but like I said earlier, that just means a longer episode. So let's keep right rolling into the NFC West or AFC West now. Maybe at some point in this episode, I'll stop saying the wrong division. That would really help too. But we'll keep rolling right into the AFC West, starting with the 4th place team and kind of a race for the bottom here in the AFC West with a very top-heavy division. At 4th place, we have the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, preseason means nothing, but we just got to watch the preseason game this weekend with the Las Vegas Raiders versus the Minnesota Vikings. And the Las Vegas Raiders played their entire starters, except for I think maybe Davante Adams didn't play, but he's the only one I can think of, for the whole first half. And they still lost the game. They were winning at halftime, but they did not get enough of a lead against the Vikings' second team to finish by winning the game. So that kind of shows you something right there. That makes you a little nervous. And more than anything, what's making me nervous is that quarterback situation. I really like Gardner Minshew, but at this point, it's sad to say he just can't really lead a playoff team. I mean, he plays well and he has fun, but he's just kind of too middle of the pack. And Aiden O'Connell isn't much better, and I think that Gardner Minshew does end up passing Aiden O'Connell at some point this year. So it's just not a great quarterback situation to be in. You lose Josh Jacobs this offseason, which was mostly your offense last year. Yeah, you still have a beast like Davante Adams, but he's getting up there in age, and can he really be the only person on the offense and still play well? They do have a very good defensive line and kind of defense in general, which is their only redeeming factor, that it's like maybe they can make a little more of a run than you'd think, but I just think it's too much to overcome with the huge question marks and shortcomings of that offense.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough season, I feel like, for the Raiders. And when you're deciding between Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew as your starting quarterback for the year, you're not in a good spot. And when you're using 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. So if they're going to do that and go back and forth between O'Connell and Minshew, it's just not going to work out. And it's really going to upset Davante Adams, who already has whispers of him leaving Las Vegas to go team back up with Aaron Rodgers in New York. So we'll see on the trade deadline where that goes. But as for now, he's still on the Raiders, and I expect him to have another huge season because he's just that good. He's not a burner, so he doesn't use his speed. It's his feet and his quickness and his route running to get you. And those are long-term traits for a wide receiver. So I expect them to still have a really good season. That defense led by Max Crosby is probably their one bright spot, where Max Crosby is a perennial Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And I expect him to have a really big season again, and even possibly be the NFL Defensive Player of the Year coming out of Las Vegas for the last place team.
Yeah, and I see Tyree Wilson on the other side in his second year doing a lot better. Everyone was calling him a bust already, which I hate when you call people bust after the first year. So I am rooting for him to kind of have a big step-up season. So now moving on to number 3, and a team that isn't in much better of a quarterback competition, we have the Denver Broncos. Now, of course, their quarterback competition does at least include a rookie, so that makes it a little more fun. But their big competition right now is Bo Nix versus Jared Stidham, which, like I said...
Wilson.
Oh, and, throw Zach Wilson in there.
Oh, it's a 3.
That makes it even more fun. I forgot about Zach Wilson. So if you have 2 quarterbacks, if you have no quarterbacks, what happens if you have 3 quarterbacks?
You really have
-1 quarterback?
Negative quarterbacks.
Yeah, so this team is just they're actually ironically very similar, the Broncos and the Raiders. I mean, they're in this weird, not that good quarterback situation. They lose huge pieces of their offense, like the Broncos lost Jerry Jeudy, which I know he wasn't a huge piece of their offense towards the end of the year, but there was a lot of other controversy swirling around that. But just like the Raiders, the Broncos do seem to always have a pretty decent defense. I mean, now they lose Justin Simmons, which is a big hit. So now they even are losing people on their defense, which doesn't look good for them. But it's just, it was like I said, there's not much more to say. It's hard to give any redeeming factors because I feel like this division is just truly a race for the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose their kind of redeeming factor is the upside of Bo Nix. I really liked Bo Nix. I was going to be more than happy if the Vikings took Bo Nix with our second pick in the first round last year. So I'm rooting for Bo Nix. Do I think he'll survive in that offense? Probably not. He does have some okay weapons with guys like Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton. And he does have a good, deep tight end class. None of them are superstars, but they do have a lot of them, and they use that 3 tight end set a lot. So there's their redeeming factor, but redeeming is a strong word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be a tough division or a tough year for this whole division, I feel like. Maybe minus the one team we'll talk about that wins it. But as far as the Broncos go, they really don't have much of a running game. We're focused more on being a kind of downfield passing team with a lot of receiving weapons like Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy, and Cortland Sutton. Now that goes without Jerry Jeudy. They do get Tim Patrick back, and Greg Dulcich really showed up and proved that he's a starting caliber tight end in the NFL. And I expect him to have an improving year. But as far as that defense goes, with them losing Justin Simmons, I expect them to take a step back, even though they do have nice corners with Patrick Surtain Jr. and or Patrick Surtain II, I guess, and Riley Moss, the Iowa boy. So they do have corners to run in the NFL, which is nice. But I don't know if it'll be enough for them to really keep up in this division.
Yeah, completely agree. It's just a toss-up for 4th place here in the AFC West.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really a toss-up for 1st place, so we'll go ahead and make this one quick. The only team with a true chance right now to dethrone the 1st place team of the Chiefs is the Los Angeles Chargers.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of, for the 3rd time in a row, same story with a different team. I mean, they, of course, don't have the quarterback competition, but they do have Justin Herbert coming off of an injury last year on his hand that was nagging him through the entire season and one of the worser years of his career, which, since he's only been around since 2020, isn't terrible, but still not a great thing to say in your 3rd year when you should be really hitting your strides. But they also lose a lot of big names this offseason. I mean, they lose Keenan Allen, who has been like their main receiver for the past decade, which is crazy to think about, that they're not going to have Keenan Allen anymore. They do keep guys like Joey Bosa and kind of the heart of their defense over there, but it's just a team that always seems to underperform. I call them the Vikings of the AFC all the time because it's true. Even when they should come out and do really well, they seem to just not do as well as they should. But in the same facet of them being the Vikings of the AFC, when they shouldn't do well, like they probably shouldn't do crazy well this season, is when they come out and have these Cinderella story magical runs that no one sees coming. So I do keep them here at 2nd just because of so unlikely that they dethrone the Chiefs at 1st. But keep an eye out for a Cinderella story from a wounded animal and a team that you do not expect.
Yeah, that is a very true possibility. I like them being here in 2nd place. I think that's a good fit for them this year with the Broncos and Raiders kind of having rebuilding years. One reason they're in 2nd is because of Justin Herbert alone. He'll win you games, like I said about Baker. He'll win you games by himself also. He's one of those types of quarterbacks. He hasn't done it as much, but he'll do it, and he'll do it more often as the years come. But one other big factor is that they're bringing in the Baltimore Ravens running back room, which really performed quite well last year. So you get
when they were healthy.
When they were all healthy, they kind of took turns getting hurt,
literally,
and each one taking the other's place. But they bring over J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, and they bring over the 3rd one. No,
Justice Hill. No.
Justice Hill, no. But they at least are able to rotate between these two, and I expect J.K. Dobbins to maybe have a surprise breakout year that everyone's always expected them to have, although he's coming off an Achilles tear, which is really tough for a running back. But the Chargers defense, led by Joey Bosa, is going to be, and Derwin James is going to be a bright spot for this Chargers team, and maybe the reason that they at least beat the Chiefs a couple of times. We'll see. But I don't expect them to win this division.
Yeah, one thing I do really like about the Chargers that just kind of clicked is they have potential in the receiver room out the wazoo. I mean, you talk about second year first round pick, Quentin Johnson being their number one guy right now, and then two highly touted rookies with their second round pick, Lad McConkey, and their seventh round pick, Brendan Rice, who the fact that he fell to the seventh round is unfathomable for me, but a great pickup for them. I could see their receiver room being better than people think, but they're still pretty wet behind the
You
ears.
can't forget about Trey Palmer.
And they do so. Josh Palmer.
But
Josh Palmer, I like
Trey
Josh
Palmer's
Palmer.
in
I forgot
Tampa.
about Josh Palmer. I did. So now moving on to the number one, pretty obvious right here. I think this is probably one of the, I'm not going to say probably, it is the most obvious pick off this entire board. It really is, no doubt about it. The Chiefs are just so good, and it all comes down to Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. You see these rotating pieces around them every year, and you think, oh, they lost a lot of people this year. Oh, they didn't really pick that much up this year. Is this their collapse year? Is it finally going to happen? And it just doesn't, because so many people have to focus on the Mahomes to Kelce connection, and even separately, both of them as their own entity. It doesn't really matter who's around them, just as long as they are NFL caliber. And I mean, if you're just decent in college, you can go be decent on the Kansas City Chiefs. That's all you really need. But even with that being said, they go and pick up a guy like Xavier Worthy in the draft, who I think is going to be kind of an X factor that this offense hasn't had since they lost Tyreek Hill, which is that pure burner, straight line speed. And I mean, when you have guys who can run the field like Travis Kelce can, and who can control linebackers with their eyes and athleticism and ability to run like Patrick Mahomes can, adding somebody who can just run 40 yards in like 2 seconds, it feels like is what he ran it in. He ran that 40-yard dash so fast. It brings a whole new element that a defense has to prepare for even more, because you can't bring safeties up. You can't have linebackers covering a slot receiver, because he'll outrun every linebacker and he'll get safeties turned and just an 80-yard touchdown waiting to happen. So it's something that I think a lot of teams don't have and the Chiefs need. So the fact that they just won a Super Bowl and now they have something on their offense that I think they needed makes it even scarier.
Yeah, they really are one of the scariest teams in the NFL. And as long as they're the champion, and until they're dethroned, they're the reigning, defending NFL champion. And there's a reason for that, and that's Patrick Mahomes, who's the best quarterback in the NFL. I hate to say it, but he is, because he proved to me that he's not just a downfield thrower. He's a student of the game. He's a surgeon in the passing room, and it's unbelievable how well he's able to come in and year out and perform with these rotating pieces. Like you said, minus Travis Kelce, where they get Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown this year, whereas last year they had Rashee Rice and Juju Smith-Schuster.
Juju, I couldn't think. I knew they had a veteran presence, but I could not think of who it was.
So they just kind of flip these guys out, and they bring in someone to replace Juju, and that's Hollywood Brown, the veteran presence, kind of downfield possession receiver. And I expect him to have a really big season this year because of that. And even though they did trade away to L'Jarius Sneed, I'd expect the defense to maybe take a step back, and maybe a couple more shootouts in this year in the NFL for the Chiefs. But I expect them to still win a lot of games, and it'll be exciting to see if they're able to pull off that three-peat.
Yeah, shootout is where they thrive. So I don't think that Chiefs fans are complaining that they're back in a shootout mode, because those are fun games and they win them a lot of the time. So now moving on to our final division. So sad that it's almost over, but we have 4 more picks right here, starting with that 4th place team of the Seattle Seahawks. Now, this was another compromise one. Callan pushed me down on the Seahawks a little bit, but I was fine with it, because this division was probably the most fun division to pick. And it's not open the way the South is. It's open in the way of, we're going to beat the hell out of each other every year, and you're going to earn that first place if you get it. The fact that we have the Seahawks as the 4th place team, who I think is going to be a really good team in the league this year, is absolutely insane to think about. But the main reason, I kind of already said it in a different way, But the main reason I was able to put the Seahawks at 4th is because the other 3 teams in this league or in this division are just really good. I think that they end up more solidified in that 3 spot, maybe even pushing for that 2 spot. But they do have a couple of big question marks, like can Geno keep doing it? Can Kenneth Walker stay healthy? They do have Zach Charbonnet behind him, which is nice. And also DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are both starting to get up there in age. And sometimes when you see receivers hit that late 20s like DK is and early 30s like Tyler Lockett's hanging out in, you see fast regression, which you don't like to see it, but it's just kind of what you see. So one of those guys might take a step back this year, which will hurt them. That defense is always questionable, whether through injuries or whether through just not playing well. So lots of ehs about the Seahawks that made it so I was okay with putting them at 4th, but I do think they do better than 4th.
Yeah, you've known I'm not good or not high on the Seahawks this year. I don't think they're going to be very good. I think Geno has hit his ceiling. He's already missed a few practices because of his elbow injury and some rib injuries. And that's not even having contact yet. So he's just kind of beginning to become injury prone. And Sam Howell has not done very well in training camp. So it may be Sam Howell's team, it may be Geno's team, but I don't expect either one to do very well. And even though they do have a nice receiving room, it's still got to be able to get the ball to those receivers. And I don't think that they'll be able to, the quarterbacks will be able to get the ball to those receivers like as much as they want them to, and especially when you got all 3 of them fighting for one ball, and that's DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. And you can't forget about Jake Bobo, who continues to make quite the impression, starring in the preseason again. So they really have a deep receiving room, a young running back room, not a very good defense. I just don't expect them to have a very good year this year.
I didn't say it when I was talking because I couldn't think of his name off the top of my head. But another reason I was fine with them going a little lower is their new head coach in Mike McDonald. I think that was a really questionable coaching call, new coach call. He was the defensive coordinator for the Ravens last year, who had a very good defense and a good track record of defenses. But I just wasn't sure how head coach ready he was, especially for a team with this meh of a defense. But moving on to our number 3 spot here, we have the Los Angeles Rams with Matthew Stafford. Now, I really like this team. Almost everybody on this team from top to bottom, I'm not saying are superstars, but I just like. They're players that you want to root for. And of course, at that top of the list is none other than Matthew Stafford, and then other guys like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua on that offense. But overall, they are just not a team that's going to hold up to the other teams in this division. I think if I had to choose, I probably would flip these 2 teams. Like if it was just me, I'd put Rams at 4 and Seahawks at 3. But nonetheless, I think that is kind of a toss-up right there, and they're going to be very close there regardless. And a big reason about that is they lost Aaron Donald. So their big question mark is, what is this defense going to be without Aaron Donald? Because it's been a really long time since we've seen this defense without a dominant pass rusher and dominant overall player like Aaron Donald. So will they be able to kind of fill in that huge hole left by him? Or are they just going to start kind of getting gashed and getting behind in games? They do have a receiving room and a veteran enough quarterback that they can stay in games even if they get behind and have to get in some shootouts. But unlike the Chiefs, this isn't a team that's built for shootouts. So
No, they're not. And I don't expect the Rams to do very well this year. Maybe it's kind of a shock at this time because you expect Matthew Stafford to do well with LA because he's performed well. And as long as he stays healthy, I do expect him to win a good number of games and compete in this division, but I just don't think it'll last long term. They don't have much of a running back room. The receiving corps is only really the main 2, and the defense, like you said, losing Aaron Donald is going to take a huge step back. And you're probably going to be behind in a lot of games because of the loss of Aaron Donald. and you're going to have to be in those shootouts where can Matthew Stafford still compete with the best of them in terms of throwing it downfield. He's a great game manager, and I think that he'll last for a long time because he's a really smart quarterback. But I don't know if he's still going to be able to wing it downfield like he did in Detroit back all those years ago.
That man has a cannon for an arm. It's insane. On the exact flip side of the coin of the Seattle Seahawks, one thing I do always really like about the Rams is their coaching staff headed by Sean McVay. He's one of my favorite coaches in the league. So that definitely gives a little more incentive for them to get moved up the board.
A common Coach of the Year candidate.
Yep. So now you're sitting here looking at this, and there's two teams left with the San Francisco 49ers and the Arizona Cardinals. And you're probably saying to yourself, they did not put the Arizona Cardinals at number 1. And you would be correct, because at number 2, we have the Arizona Cardinals, which is probably higher than most people expect anyway. And I had to use all of my compromising and everything to get them up here number 2 in this division with Callan. But I love the Arizona Cardinals this year. They are my team this year to watch. I think that Kyler Murray, when he came in last year and he didn't have Cliff Kingsbury breathing down his neck, and he had Jonathan Gannon who said, I'm going to focus on the defense. You go do Kyler Murray type things. I think that he was playing some of his best football since his rookie year. And that was with no receivers, like a really bad receiver room, except for maybe
Michael
Wilson, who had a huge step up towards the end of the year. But now you add to this equation one of the best receiving prospects in a long time, in my opinion, with Marvin Harrison Jr. being their new number 1, and let Michael Wilson not have to go out there and be a number 1 as an undrafted or late round drafted guy or whatever he was drafted just a year or two ago. That is a recipe for really good things for this offense. And I think a continually underrated running back in the league is none other than James Conner. I think even way back when he was with Pittsburgh, he kind of got dumped on more than he should have. And I think that he has been a bright star for this offense. They do have, of course, a lot of question marks, mainly on the defensive side, but also on the offensive line. But luckily, when you have a quarterback who's really good on the run and really good mobility, like Kyler Murray is, your offensive line can be a little more shaky, and their defense is young but growing and has a couple of studs on it that I think could continue to get better and better and really start to show off this year. So they are a underdog. They are a dark horse, to say the least, especially to finish this high in the best division in the league. But I love the Cardinals this year.
Yeah, this is probably the biggest shocker of the board so far. And I kind of like it just because I really like the way Kyler Murray played last year, coming back off that injury. He's got another year with Jonathan Gannon and that offensive system. I think that he'll do even better than last year. That running back room led by James Conner is going to make a huge impact like it always does. And I really like the connection that Kyler Murray has with their tight end, Trey McBride. And I think that he's going to have a huge season, Trey McBride. I think that he's going to end up looking like one of the top tight ends in the NFL at the end of the year. And that defense continues to grow along with B.J. Ojulari leading that pass rush. And with Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in, leading that new receiving room, I expect them to make a huge jump in the NFL this year.
Yeah, and Paris Johnson Jr. is the young and upcomer on their offensive line that I couldn't think of. I knew they had just drafted a guy, not this year, but the year before, and he's the guy that I couldn't think of. He had a really stellar rookie season, and I could see him just getting better. So that really helps your offensive line right there, just having one cornerstone type bookend guy like that. So now finally, from one of the biggest shocks to one of the smallest shocks, to finish things out, we have the San Francisco 49ers winning the NFC West again. And there is really not much to be said about the San Francisco 49ers because they are just so good. I mean, just if you want to talk about pure pound for pound, position per position, skill, strength, talent in the NFL, they really just have it all. And hell, let's say they do lose Brandon Ayuk, who I just saw some, I don't think it's real reports, I think it's more rumors, but it's rumored that they are very close to a deal of sending Brandon Ayuk to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So let's even say they do lose Brandon Ayuk. I still think that they're one of the better teams in the NFL. So the fact that he's still on their roster right now and you still got to kind of factor him in as a 49er just makes him even better. And of course, you look at Brock Purdy, who's very controversial on that one, on whether you think he's one of their stronger points or their weaker points. But when you have the talent around him, no matter if you think he's weak or you think he's strong, it's just easy to play well at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And more than anything, the reason that they stay at number one for me is because they have what I would confidently say is the best player out of any position in the league. I know Tyreek Hill just won the number one player in the top 100 this year, but I think it's Christian McCaffrey. He is just so dynamic. He is so do-it-all. And he's just so consistent for a position as a running back that's so inconsistent in the NFL anymore, whether through injuries or just fizzling out or just not having consistent play. He is that bright spot of consistency.
Yeah, and he's probably a perennial MVP candidate, and one of the reasons that the 49ers finished first in the NFC West this year. Not only that, but that defense always is stellar with that strong defensive line led by Nick Bosa and Javon. Do they still have Javon Kinlaw?
They do.
Yep. So I thought they did. So that defense was always ferocious and fearful. And so that offensive line is a veteran-led group. So I expect the 49ers to be like the Chiefs, very consistent, very well put together, and very well ran. And I expect them to win a lot of games this year. And even though Brock Purdy is a controversial quarterback, and just in the sense of, is he the weak point? Is he really, he fits that system perfectly. And that's what it is that he just fits that Shanahan system perfectly. And you got to have a specific skill set to fit that system. And he has that specific skill set for that system. And so it just works really well for the 49ers. And they really got lucky because they swung and missed on Trey Lance, but they really hit it out of the park with Brock Purdy.
Definitely. They don't have Javon Kinlaw. As soon as I said it, I knew we were wrong.
Oh.
Javon Hargrave, who they just picked up from the Eagles. That's who they have now. But still, nonetheless, a stellar defensive line at all four positions there, just like they're stellar at every position outside of the
we didn't even mention George Kittle.
You can just, because you couldn't mention anybody. I mean, it'd be easier to throw up a picture of their depth chart, because that's, if you want to mention their stars and their cornerstones, it's their whole roster. It's absolutely insane. But so this is our final pick for all 32 teams in the NFL. I'll of course take a picture and throw it up right now so you can see them a little better for a little bit here. But usually we'd be done with the episode right here. But wait, there is more.
There's
We're not only giving all of the 32 teams position-wise, but we also just wanted to quickly talk about who we think are going to be our 3 wildcard teams for both the NFC and the AFC. So starting off with the AFC, just like we have been this whole time, it's a little bit of a spoiler. We did go 1 team from 3 of each division. We didn't double up any just because it's too risky and too unpredictable. But there is definitely a lot of teams that could do it. But for now, we have in our wild card spots the Miami Dolphins, the Baltimore Ravens, as well as the Jacksonville Jaguars. A little more obvious for this one up here for reasons we already talked about with the Los Angeles Chargers. And I think we could easily see any of these third place teams make their way into the wild card as well. But for now, these are the teams we have. I think that the Dolphins track star team won't do quite as well, but it'll still be enough to be top 7 in the league. I think that the Ravens are going to make a very strong push for that 5th wild card spot. And I think the Jaguars find themselves there as well.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure really where these guys will fall in terms of 5, 6, and 7, but I expect them to be the wild card teams because, like you said, the Dolphins are going to win a good number of games just because they're going to outrun most teams. The Ravens, even though I expect them to have a down year, are more than likely going to have a repeat consistent year because of their consistent coaching staff and are a likely wild card team, if not a division winner. And the Jaguars, I think they're the one that slip in as that 7th seed over teams like the Chargers, Titans, and Bengals. And I think they slip in just because of Trevor Lawrence. I think he has an MVP caliber season, and I expect the Jaguars to do really well this year.
Yep. And then moving on to the bottom in the NFC side of things, we ironically have the exact same setup, did not do it on purpose, but we have the Philadelphia Eagles, the Green Bay Packers, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as our wild card teams. Now, I think the Eagles are probably the shoe-in, in my opinion, for that one. They definitely have a lot of inconsistencies, and they really started to look bad towards the end of the year last year. But even with all that being said, they're in a pretty top-heavy division with just them and the Cowboys really showing up, at least the past few years. I think the tides are changing on that with the Commanders there in that division. But I think that they have a very good chance to make the wild card this year. The Packers are my bubble team, not just because I'm a Vikings fan, but I need to see what Jordan Love does. I need to see what these young receivers can continue to do before I say they're a division winner or a shoo-in for the wild card. But for now, just with some of the other teams in this division, I think they can finish in that 7 and sneak in there. And then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we already talked about that. I think they were probably a division winner in my opinion. So they at least got to be a wild card team. And I know I just talked about how much I love the Cardinals, and then we didn't make them a wild card team. But two big reasons. I love a good over prediction, but I hate a stretch. And then going straight to the playoffs is a little bit of a stretch.
I think they'll win a lot of games.
Could happen, but it's a stretch. And secondly, good divisions like this that are just good on all 4 teams from top to bottom beat the hell out of each other throughout the season. So it's hard enough to win that division and make it to the playoffs. It's really hard to go against those good teams all year and make a wild card spot.
Yeah, and again, I think it's more likely that this is the layout for the NFC. It's not as likely as the number 3 teams to take the wild card as it is in the AFC. I think the AFC is much more powerful than the NFC this year in terms of 1 through 16 for each conference. But I like the Eagles just because they have such a powerful offense with that receiving core, that running room. Jalen Hurts proving that he is a starting caliber quarterback. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think, is my team that sneaks in as that 7th seed, just because Baker Mayfield kind of has the same kind of season as Trevor Lawrence and has an MVP caliber season. I expect him to lead the Buccaneers to maybe even a division title if the Falcons falter at all, because that's very possible. And I expect them to be one of the playoff teams. But when it comes to the Green Bay Packers, I really wanted them to be a division winner. I am very high on the Packers this year. I think Jordan Love is the franchise guy, much to your dismay.
I hope you're high on the Packers.
I know. Well, right.
I'm high on the Vikings.
Right. I mean, even from an analyst standpoint, I expect the Packers to do very well this year because they're a very young team, and this is a young man's game. And I expect that defense to take a step forward, led by their the coaching change of Jeff Hafley and the 4-3 system now, which is focused more to stop the run. So I think that they won't get as much running.
Won't get gashed.
Won't get gashed as much anymore. Rashawn Gary is having a hell of a camp, proving that he's going to be a perennial Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And I expect this wide receiving room to take a huge jump with guys like Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed. You had Grant DeBose step up in the preseason.
You're not going to even mention your boy, Bo Melton.
Bo Melton had 3 drops.
Oh, no.
He's now on the bubble.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so it was a tough week for Bo Melton. But this receiving room is deep, and I expect them to have a great connection with Jordan Love. Josh Jacobs was the NFL rushing champion just 2 years ago. I expect them to have a bounce-back season, even though history says he won't. I think that he'll defy those odds and have a very good running back season for the Green Bay Packers.
One thing you did mention there that I really liked is you said it's a young man's game, and it's true. It seems like every year these teams get younger and younger, and your superstars and top-of-the-league guys are younger and younger.
Yep.
So that is a very interesting point. So that was bada bang, bada boom, out of nowhere, a whole week early, done with our division rankings list. We hope you guys enjoyed this one. This was one of my, of course we like it because it's new and fresh, but this is one of my favorite things to record in a while. Draft maybe beat it out just because I love the draft, but this one was fun to do. So thank you all so much for watching it, and please let us know in the comments ways that we can improve it or other kind of fun, fresh ideas like this, and we'd love to hear them. Other than that, don't forget to leave a like, and until next time, don't forget.
But wait, when will we be back for?
Oh yeah. Okay, so we won't have an episode next week.
Till our pick 'em before
and then
week 1.
The next episode that we will have will be just before week 1, the Thursday morning of week 1 is when it'll come out.
Of the Chiefs
Can't remember the exact date, but I'll pop that up right here. So that is when morning of that Thursday will be our next episode back.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Yep.
I almost forgot to mention that. That was a good one to mention. So until that date, don't forget
to eat the W.